Hello, my name is Savannah. Welcome to Savann Knits. This is my knitting podcast where I talk all about the things that I'm knitting that are bringing me joy. I live in Utah in the United States where I'm a stay-at-home mom and I love to knit and read. And I like to ask you guys a question of the day so I can get to know you better. So the question of the day is a simple one. What is your primary work in progress that you're working on right now? And how do you feel about it? Today we have a podcast episode of One Finished Object, which I'm already smiling because I'm sure you can tell what it is. And then I have a returning work in progress and a new work in progress. And then I'll do a little bit of a reading and media update at the end, since in my last video I asked if you guys liked hearing reading updates and media updates, and a lot of you said that you would like to hear about that. But of course, if you're not interested, feel free to leave early. No need to stick around if you don't want to. So let's get into it. I have finished my Iris by Trin Onley. It is this sweater! I can't believe I finished it. I promise you that I was working on this so hard because I was kind of tired of giving you guys updates and podcast episodes. And so I thought that I would wait to record another episode until I finished this sweater. And then I really missed recording. And I wanted to record, and I also really wanted this sweater done. So I worked on this sweater for no joke, 6 hours a day for 4 days, something like that. I knit both sleeves in a week, which is insane because they're all over colorwork sleeves in fingering weight yarn. So I'm really impressed with myself that I did that, but I was really motivated to finish. I was really excited to get this done, especially because this week Utah has been having some snow, and so I really wanted to have this final chance to wear this sweater before it starts to get warmer and warmer. So I did it. I can't believe that I did, but I did it. So last time we talked, I was just starting or almost going to start the ribbing for the body. And I was trying to decide if I wanted to do the recommended 3mm needle for the ribbing or if I should do a 2.75mm like I did for the collar. And I decided to do the 2.75 for the body ribbing, mostly because I wanted the ribbing to be a little bit tighter, and it looks really gapey when you're knitting it up, and luckily it blocks out pretty beautifully, but it still, you can still see that it's like not the tightest ribbing fabric in the world. And not that there's a huge difference between a 3mm needle and a 2.75, but if I could close a little bit of that gap and make it a little bit neater and tighter, then I would do that with the 2.75. So that's what I decided to do. Turned out great. This pattern has 2x2 ribbing, and the pattern doesn't say to do a rearranging of the stitches and then do a Italian bind off. So I didn't do that. I just followed the pattern which said normal bind off. It was glorious, very fast, and I think it looks great, honestly. And that also is for the sleeves too. So you can see that the binding looks perfectly neat, just with the regular bind off. Sometimes I do wonder if the Italian bind off is a little bit overrated. So after I finished the body ribbing, I picked up stitches for the sleeves because it is a drop shoulder. So I picked up stitches and then I followed the chart exactly. The chart has obviously the color work, but it also has where exactly you should decrease and when, and I just followed that perfectly, except for I did shorten the sleeves. There is supposed to be another orange and brown section repeated, but I always have to shorten sleeves, and I saw a lot of patterns or other projects on Ravelry of other people that shorten the sleeves as well, and the sleeves still look plenty long. So I decided to stop a little early, and I did repeat one row just so that this stem could be a little bit longer. And then because I was missing a lot of this chart here, I ended up just doing the extra decreases in the ribbing to make it so that this cuff is still the appointed stitch count for my size. So I just did more rapid decreases in the cuff, and I don't think that it looks too drastic at all. They still they look a little bit, you know, cinched in with the ribbing and the decreases, but I think that it looks great. I forgot to mention before that I used Holstgarn Super Soft for this sweater, the same colors as the designer used for her sample, which is nougat, cinnamon, goldcrest, maize, topaz, marlin, and bleached white. Oh, I think I'm missing one, and pebble. That's right, 8 colors. And I used the recommended 3.5 millimeter needle, and I made a size 2 for myself. And this was my first time working with Holstgarn Super Soft. As I've mentioned before, it's a very ropey, sticky yarn that has the spinning oil still in it as you're knitting with it. And it does make the fabric look pretty gapey and not very pretty when you're working with it, but when it blocks, it blooms really beautifully. And I have a video and some pictures of before and after of the blocking process, and you can see how much it changes. It changes quite a bit. It softens up a lot. I wouldn't say it's, you know, like a soft merino, but it definitely does feel a lot softer than when it's in its original form. Trin Onally has some specific instructions for how to block this yarn to get the most out of the bloom and soften it up, and I followed her instructions exactly, which is to put the sweater in hot water and let it sit until the water cools down. I am not patient enough for that, so I just let it sit for about 15 minutes in the hot water, and the water turns very, very dark from all the oils. You then drain it, and I didn't notice any color bleeding or anything like that. Drained it, squeezed out some water, put it through a delicate cycle in my washing machine with some wool wash, and then did an extra spin cycle after that, and then laid it flat to dry as normal with blocking pins. I will say that when I blocked this, afterwards, I noticed that this collar stretched out quite a bit. In my pre-blocking photos, you can see that the collar is very much like a crew neck, and this is now very much like a wide neck, which I wanted to avoid, and so that's why I did do a 2.75 millimeter needle to hopefully make the collar tighter, but it didn't really help because blocking just stretched it out. So I will be going back to add an elastic because it is a little bit wider than I would like. But at the same time, if I wanted this to be a spring sweater, maybe it would be nice to have a wider collar so it's not just, I feel like if it's more of an open neck, it's more spring and fall friendly than if it were closer, then it would be more of a winter sweater. So I think if it stretches out any more than this, I would add elastic. But for right now, because it is spring, I think the open neck works well. And I also think it just comes down to personal preference. So I can definitely see myself adding elastic in the future to this. Overall, I am incredibly proud of myself for making the sweaters. Definitely the hardest knitting project I've ever done. The beginning was especially hard with this cast on for, let me get my hair out of the way, this cast on for this double knitting cast on, I think is what she called it. And it was very fiddly and tricky, and then joining in the round with some steek stitches for the collar, that was very fiddly and hard to do, and I kept hitting roadblock after roadblock and making mistakes because it was my first time doing this construction and I didn't quite understand things, and it was incredibly frustrating at the beginning. I will say that it's worth it though, because if you push past through all of that at the beginning, once you get to a comfortable point in the round, you can just cruise on the color work, which is definitely what I did, and I loved knitting the color work, even to the point where I was working on this for 5 to 6 hours a day for a couple days. I was getting to the point where I was finishing my final sleeve, and I was suddenly quite sad that I was going to leave this behind because I had such a fun time knitting it. And that to me is the perfect example of finding joy in what you're knitting, that even though it's hard, you're still finding fulfillment in that and still enjoying the process. You can still enjoy the process even if it's a little bit difficult, and maybe even more so that you enjoy it because you know that you worked hard for it and learned a lot of new skills, and so it makes the joy that much more apparent. And I discovered that color work is my love, and I will be doing a lot more color work in the future because I truly love it. It's very engaging for me, and it doesn't seem too difficult because it's just knit stitches. You're just alternating colors, and so it's the perfect example of almost mindless knitting for me, but adding a little bit of interest with the color work. It was something that I could definitely work on while watching TV or while my kids are around once I got the hang of the motif, and I loved every second of it. Now, that being said, this sweater took a lot of hours, and it took me a little bit less than 2 months to make it, which I feel like is extremely fast for a fingering weight all over colorwork sweater, which shows that one, I enjoyed working on it and was happy to work on it a lot, but also that it was just worth it. And the hard parts were worth it to get to the easier parts, and overall it was just a very engaging project that it took me just 2 months to make it. That being said, I don't know if I love the steeking part of color work, and I really don't mind working color work flat, so I think I will prioritize knitting color work flat over steeking because I did have some issues doing too tight of a crochet reinforcement, which then led my armhole depth to be a lot shorter than it should have been, so I had to go in and kind of loosen those crochet reinforcement stitches. It worked out in the end, but that was also stressful. So this sweater holds a lot of emotion, a lot of learning, and is kind of a map of where I started with this project, not knowing a lot about steeking, not knowing how long a fingering weight colorwork sweater would take, and to the end I can just see so much growth and so much pride in what I've made. And so for that reason, I love this sweater even more. It is more special to me because of all of that hard work and new things that I learned. And I have heard some people kind of talk about their magnum opus. That's been a idea that's been bouncing around on knitting podcasts recently, I feel like. And this definitely could be a candidate just because of how much, time it took, the new things that I learned, and how much I love the finished product. Now, I feel like I won't get a ton of wear out of this because it is starting to warm up, so it really will be a test of next fall and winter of how much I actually wear this, but I could imagine it would be a lot, and I'm very, very happy with it. I love the fabric, love the fit, and yeah, couldn't be happier with it, except for maybe the collar, but that's fixable with elastic. I know that there are some people who are also planning on making this sweater, so all of my notes for this project, all the things that I did differently or mistakes that I made that I then learned from, those are all in my Ravelry projects page, so feel free to check that out if you need help, or as always, you can send me a message or an email and I'm happy to help if I can, because yes, this sweater is a little bit complicated, but it's worth it. Keep going. You will fall in love with the finished sweater. I can guarantee it. I started this on February 3rd and finished it on March 31st. So yes, a little bit less than 2 months and worth it every single second. And I'm a little sad to leave it behind, but now I get to wear it. So happy me. Let's start with works in progress now. We'll start with the returning whip that I have. I am making the Comfort Core socks by Summer Lee, and this is a sock that she modeled after an athletic sock. So it has that ribbing in the arch part of the foot that will help with fit. And I'm knitting a size medium using 2.25 millimeter needles, magic loop. And I am using a sock yarn from Long Dog Yarn, and this is the color Your Last Act on This Planet Will Be Surrendering to a Woman. It's a very, very beautiful maroon, pinkish purple with some light variegation in there. I love this color so, so much. I finished the first sock for this. So here it is. This variegation is just so pretty. I did a 1x1 rib on the top here, and I did 1 3/4 inch for the cuff. I did a 5.5 inch leg, and with this pattern she has a lot of different ways that you can do it. She has one where you could have 2x2 rib on the leg. She has a striped version where you just have those like 2 athletic stripes on the leg. Oh, I hit myself in the face. And she has a shorty version. So there's lots of different options for this pattern. This pattern also comes in a lot of sizes from kids to adults. So it's very inclusive for ages that way. I decided to just do a normal leg without any ribbing so I could make sure that the yarn variegation showed off in this part. And then when you're doing the gusset decreases, because it's a heel flapping gusset, you do this seed stitch portion on the top. I'm not exactly sure why that there's this seed stitch portion. I'm assuming it's to add extra cushiness on the top of your foot, but I don't really know why fit-wise it would be there. It seems like it's more for an aesthetic reason. I could be wrong. Correct me if you know why. But what I love is this section right here. This is basically just a slip stitch section, just like the heel right here. You just do it on the arch of your foot, and it really sinks or pulls this part in with your foot. So if you have high arches like me, this is so comfortable. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know if I would like it or not. I assumed that I would. When I put this sock on, oh my goodness, it hugs my foot so well and is so comfortable. So I am thinking on my basic socks, I might just put in just this section of this slip stitch when I get to my arch, because I incredibly love how it fits. And I do love my socks to be more tight fitting, and I feel like I haven't quite figured that out with knitting them yet, because I'm doing the size medium is a 64 stitch cast on, right? Which is usually a size medium for socks across the board. And sometimes that feels tight and sometimes that feels loose. And I think it's because of different yarns. I think it's also because of sometimes I am knitting more tightly than other times. So it's a little bit hard to streamline it. And I've noticed that this leg is quite slouchy on my leg, but this fits so, so well. So I am taking notes for my next socks that maybe I just need to knit tighter in this section, or maybe even decrease a couple stitches as I'm working the leg. But this is going to carry on into my socks because I love, love, love that extra support on my arch. So you do that section, and then you do another section of seed stitch just on top here before you do the toe. And as I've said, I finished the first one, and then I am working on the second one right now. I am just doing the heel flap. So I've got a bit to go. These definitely fell to the wayside as I was working on this iris a lot more. And yeah, I think that that's all I have to say. We'll see how far I get by the next podcast episode. For my last work in progress, it's a new one. You guys have never seen it before. I don't even know if I've talked about this before. But I am making the plain Yoke Tee 20 by Lynette. And this is one of her more size inclusive patterns because I know sometimes she does and sometimes she doesn't, and I try to knit only from size inclusive patterns. So this one is a little bit more size inclusive, and I had bought this pattern at least a year ago, planning on using some worsted weight yarn. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but sometimes on Ravelry it says what weight you should knit the pattern in, and sometimes it's wrong. And on this pattern it says worsted, but the stitch is a 20 stitch gauge. So I would not say that that's a worsted, I would say that's more of a DK weight. And the yarn that I originally had in mind for this did not work because it made the fabric way too tight and stiff, because 20 stitches is more of a DK weight gauge. So this pattern has just been sitting in my library for a while, and I got some of this Noro Uchiwa yarn from my local yarn store, and it was on a really good sale. And I thought, if I'm ever gonna try Noro, now is the time, because it is a more expensive yarn, and because this was on a very good sale, I thought, let's just try it. So I got 2 balls, and this is the color 9, which is Matsumoto, something like that. Navy blue, but it has some, pink and greens in there as well. And when I bought this yarn, I didn't look at it like super closely. And then I went on Ravelry and looked at projects for using this color of this yarn. And I noticed that it's a self-striping a little bit, and you can even see, like, if I could look at it more closely, then I would have been able to see that it's definitely got some self-striping parts in it. And I forgot to mention that this yarn is a cotton, viscose, and silk blend, which I've never used that kind of blend before. So I was excited to try it. But I wanted to minimize the self-striping as much as I could. Self-striping in garments kind of stresses me out a little bit, and especially if it's a drop shoulder or a raglan, because I feel like the color pooling looks weird to me. And I know that other people love it and it's totally fine, and I know that people find joy in seeing how the yarn reacts to those kinds of patterns. But for me, I know that I wouldn't wear it and it would stress me out as I'm knitting it, and I'm not about my hobby stressing me out at all. So 2 things I decided to do to minimize the self-striping nature of this yarn, which is going to self-stripe anyways, because that's just what it is. You can't minimize it all the way, right? So first, I knew that I wanted to do a round yoke construction, because then at least you wouldn't have that weird, with a raglan and self-striping, you have almost like these stripes of colors that go down to the raglan seam, then across, and then up through the arm part or the shoulders. So it just looks like this when you're doing it. And I really don't like that sharp angle where the raglan is. And with drop shoulder, the striping on the top is not going to match the striping on the bottom, because with the drop shoulder, you're working a lot of it flat back and forth. So the stripes are going to be bigger because you're working back and forth. Then when you get in the round, they're going to be shorter because you're putting the yarn all the way around in a circumference, right? So I wanted a round yoke to be able to hopefully make the stripes as even as possible. And I had never done a round yoke construction before, so I wanted to try it. I then also decided that I wanted to alternate skeins. Another person on Ravelry had alternated skeins on a sleeve of their sweater that they made in this yarn, and I thought that it looked cool. And so I thought that I would just try it and see what alternating could do for me. So I did swatch with this yarn to make sure that I got a fabric that I wanted because Ravelry says this yarn is an Aran weight. And it's kind of a weird amount in these Noro balls because I'm trying to see how much is in. So it's 200 grams for 500 meters, and it says that it's a worsted weight. I feel like it's a very light worsted weight though, and I really do like the fabric that it came in. It's very stretchy. It doesn't feel that stiff at all. I mean, it's not the drapiest thing, but it doesn't feel very stiff. So I alternated skeins on this swatch, and I think it turned out pretty well. You can see up here at the top, it's starting to do that, like merging into a lighter color here than down here, but I think that that looks less stark, so less stripy and more of like an ombre effect, which I really like. When I blocked this swatch, the gauge is supposed to be 20 stitches, right? And Lynette actually has two versions of this tee. She has a 20 stitch version and a 22 stitch version, just depending on the gauge that you want, which I don't feel like that's a huge difference between a 20 stitch and a 22 stitch, but whatever. I blocked this and the yarn grew quite a bit. So I was hitting gauge when I first knit this. I hit 20 stitches and I hit the row gauge perfectly. And then when I blocked this, it turned into 18 stitches, and then I was still hitting the row gauge. So it just was growing a little bit. So I did that cool trick that I think I watched a YouTube video on or something, where you figure out if your gauge is different, then you figure out how many stitches per inch that you're getting. So for me, that was 4.5 stitches. And then I decided the circumference inch number that I wanted for my tee, and with about 3 to 4 inches of positive ease, I wanted it to be around 47 inches for my circumference. And so I took the 4.5 stitch per inch number and did some math with that 47 circumference number. And I'm not going to try to explain exactly what I did, because if I do, my brain will get confused, and with math, I have to have it all written out. I can't just do it in my head. So I figured out exactly how many stitches I would need to have that 47 inch circumference. And then I went to the pattern and I looked at the number of stitches after you're separating for sleeves, what that body circumference stitch count should be, and picked my size based off of that. It is making me a little bit nervous because I'm knitting a size smaller than I normally would, and I just have to trust that my yarn will grow when blocking like it did with my swatch to make sure that it will fit me. So I am knitting the size medium, which is the 4th size, and we'll see how it fits. I am using a 4mm needle for the body, and I'll show you what I have so far. It's a bit of a mess because I am doing the helical knitting alternating skeins. So I've got 2 strands coming off of here. It's a very simple round yoke construction. Here we go. So this is what I have so far. So you can see it's not exactly like super striping, but you can see elements of the striping where it goes from like the greenish yellow to the pink back to the greenish yellow. You've got a section of mostly navy blue up here, but I think with the alternating skeins, it softens it and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at for sure. With this, you just cast on the top with a smaller needle, and I used a 3.25mm needle. I think you're supposed to use a 3mm needle, but I do not have a 3mm 16-inch circumference needle, which I didn't for this one, this iris, and I didn't for this one. So I might need to just buy one because of how many times this is coming up. But I just used a 3.25 and I think it works fine. And you just knit a couple of rows of stockinette and just let it roll, which is very easy and I think looks great with this. So I did that, and then yeah, just plugging along on the yoke, doing some increases. It is harder to keep track of the increases when you're doing a circular yoke. So, but I think I found a system that works for me. I don't think there's too much more to talk about. It is fun working with a new yarn. It's very thick and thin, so that adds to the fun of it, and just kind of the color changes, and I think it's just absolutely a beautiful, stunning yarn. I can see why Nora was so popular, and I'm enjoying it so much that I have only been working on this for 2 days, and I already have this much done, and honestly I am almost ready to split for sleeves. So that's exciting. I can't wait to keep working on this, and it's just such a difference going from a fingering weight coloring to a DK almost Aran weight just straight stockinette project that it's flying off the needles. So very happy with how this is turning out. Can't wait to have it done and ready to wear for the spring. Okay, my friends, that is all of the knitting that I have for you today. I will next do a reading and media segment, so if you don't want to watch, that's totally fine. Thank you for watching the knitting part, and I will catch up with you next time. But if you're sticking around for the reading, I have finished 3 books since we last talked. The first one is Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. This book comes out in September, and I was lucky to receive an early copy from the publisher. And this is a standalone by Rebecca Ross, but set in the same world as her Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows books. And it's a story about a goddess who falls in love with a mortal man, and kind of the adventure and love story that they have during this political landscape with both human politics and god and goddesses politics. And the world building was absolutely stunning. The magic was very stunning as well. It was a little bit slower with the plot, I feel, and it just had a very mythical and fairy tale like feel to it. So definitely make sure that you're in the mood for something like that. But her writing is absolutely gorgeous, as always. The next book that I read was A Place to Hang the Moon. This is a middle grade novel about 3 siblings that are sent to the countryside during World War II and have to find a family to adopt them, but they can't let that family know that they're orphans. And it has some beautiful sibling relationships in there. It has a lot of heartbreaking things, but also has that theme of hope throughout. I read this one on audio, and I highly recommend because it was a very short but very fulfilling read. Another book that I finished on audio, because I was knitting the sweater so much, I was listening to a lot of audiobooks. I read Christa Comes Out of Her Shell. This is by Abby Waxman, and it is kind of a contemporary romance, but also leans more towards just a regular contemporary, or if you want to call it women's fiction. And it's about a Christa who is I don't know what the right term is, but she studies snails. She's a scientist that studies water snails. And she ends up going home because her dad, who was presumed dead, has now returned, and he's also famous, and so she has to go home and deal with all of the drama that comes with him returning, and also comes back to see that her childhood friend is now very hot. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars, and it was entertaining, but I did find some issues with it. But you'll have to let me know if you read it and your thoughts on it. As for watching, I have been rewatching The Grand Tour. I love that movie, or that series, so much. It's so funny. I don't really care about the cars part of it, but it's just very entertaining. And then I've also been rewatching Andor to prepare for season 2, which comes out in a couple weeks. Very excited for that. And I also somewhat started the Wheel of Time series. I have not watched it before, and I'm only about 2 episodes in and enjoying it. And I don't think that I'll be watching it a ton, but it's fun to have an ongoing series whenever I'm in a fantasy mood. Okay, I think that that's all for the media update. That's all for the knitting update. I hope you guys are knitting what is bringing you joy. Let me know in the comments what you have been working on, your primary whip, and how you feel about it. And I will talk to you next time. Bye.